Joining me now is Congressman Khanna of California and Melissa Murray, NYU law professor, MSNBC legal analyst, and co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Honestly, I've had it just as much as it seems like Judge Boasberg in this 46-page directive, if you will. Congressman, can I just start with you? We are seeing at least one of the guardrails that our founding fathers intended on working, that is the judiciary. Your thoughts about the developments today, and frankly, the fact that the Trump administration is actively defying other court orders as we speak.
It's a betrayal of the American experiment. Look, in J.D. Vance and Donald Trump's America, police can knock on an immigrant's door, deport them to a dictatorship without any due process. Now, the Supreme Court, 9-0, said that Obrego is entitled to due process here. It's important to realize it's not that El Salvador came and kidnapped him. We sent him there. We can certainly demand that he return. And J.D. Vance exposed everything when he tweeted out saying he's not even concerned about a pretense of compliance with the Supreme Court. He just believes that immigrants should not get due process. Well, you have a sitting vice president who's saying to defy the Supreme Court and saying that the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution and due process is irrelevant, and all that matters is what he thinks. This is a unprecedented crisis in our country's history.
Unprecedented crisis. Melissa, you're a constitutional law expert here. A key quote from Boasberg's ruling, he noted defendants offer various imaginative arguments for why they nevertheless technically complied with the order. None of their positions would stand scrutiny. He also writes, defendants protest that the Supreme Court has since vacated the TROs. How can contempt lie? The Supreme Court long ago answered that question. It's firmly settled that a court order must be obeyed until it is reversed for error by the issuing court. Make it make sense, Melissa.
Sure. So Judge Boasberg in that passage is referring to the fact that the Supreme Court actually vacated his initial order on a procedural ground, that the case should have been filed in the Fifth Circuit, where the detainees had actually been before they were then rendered to El Salvador. So they took it out of Judge Boasberg's chambers and moved it to that other court. But the point he is making is that before that happened, before the Supreme Court acted, he had issued this order to the government to ask them to provide those detainees with due process, to let them have an opportunity to explain whether they had been removed in error or whether these charges against them were in error. And that order had to stand, and they had to comply with it until the Supreme Court removed it and put it into another court. So that's the point that he's making there. But I just wanted to address this broader question about the courts here. The courts are doing a Herculean job right now standing up to this administration, but it's not really the job that they were intended to do, or at least not what they were intended to do alone. This is a tripartite system of government. The judiciary is just one branch. The other branch is Congress. And I would say here, with all due respect to Congressman Khanna, who I know from law school, Congress has completely abdicated the field here. And I know that the Democrats are not in a majority here, but this is a situation where a president is acting so lawlessly that Congress should be empowered to act, whether it is through oversight, whether it is through the power of the purse. Turn off the lights in the White House until there is compliance with the judicial order. There are lots of things that Congress can do if it has the will to do it, if it is acting on behalf of the American people. And that is the question here, too.
Congressman, I guess, is there anything you think that would move your Republican colleagues to assert what is their constitutional authority to do their jobs as being a co-equal branch of government? They are currently acting like an extension of the executive branch.
The one place that they've started to have doubts is on the capricious tariff policy, because the one thing in America you can't do is destroy people's money and wealth. And you have had some Republicans speak up. Their constituents' retirement plans have been hurt. The farmers have been hurt. Small businesses have been hurt. But what I believe, and Melissa's absolutely right, is that Congress needs to act. Look, when Brown versus Board of Education came out, the Southerners, in a shameful moment of history in Congress, passed a House resolution, or didn't pass it, introduced it, condemning Brown versus Board of Education. It was, unfortunately, a very powerful document. We need to, in my view, right now, have a House resolution, make it as bipartisan, saying that the president has to comply with the Supreme Court. And then you need to use the power of the purse to make sure that happens. We also need an emergency DNC meeting that people have called for. I think the American people get the urgency. Frankly, I don't think enough people in Congress do. And so I think the critique is valid.
As we speak, I am just getting notification that the Trump administration has appealed Judge Boasberg's ruling, his order where he found probable cause to hold the government in criminal contempt. So this will actually continue in court. Just today, a federal judge has called Donald Trump's order targeting prominent law firms a shocking abuse of power. You couple this with the other lawlessness acts that we have talked about here. You know, Melissa, it just makes me wonder if the biggest law firms in this country, many of them unwilling to stand up to the president, if some of the richest people in this country, many of them unwilling to stand up to the president and this administration and think it's better to just go along with the get along and give him what he wants. If lawmakers in the Republican Party think are afraid to stand up to the president. If some Democrats, elected Democrats in the country, don't feel as though it is proper to stand up to the president, how the heck are regular people across the country supposed to feel as though that they have any power here, even though they do have the power? But at this moment, it doesn't feel that way.
No, it's a great question. There are a lot of people here with lots on the line, whether it is businesses that may go under because of retaliation from this administration, whether it's universities that risk losing crucial funding, whether it is for ordinary operations or for innovative research that will advance humankind going forward. There's a lot to lose here. And you're right. I think people are trying to make good faith assessments of how to strike that balance. And it is an unenviable task. The bottom line that I think we all need to remember is that these individuals, whether it's law firms or universities or even members of Congress, I think to some degree, didn't put themselves in this mess. This is an administration that is doing this to the American public, retaliating against those whose understanding of the rule of law does not align with its own. And how do ordinary people stand up? I think it is making it clear to your representatives and senators that they don't represent this administration. They represent their constituents. And maybe some of their constituents want this, but I doubt all of their constituents do. I mean, some of the funding of the universities is happening in red states where the university itself is among the largest employers. So the defunding of the university is going to have a real and material impact on the economies of those cities in Alabama, in other parts of the South, in deep red states. This is going to hurt everyone. It's not just sticking it to elite universities. It's not just sticking it to law firms. Everyone will suffer.
I will note that the New York Times is reporting today that the law firms made a deal with Trump, and now he wants more from them. We have been talking about, and here it is right there, he wants more from them. If you give a bully just a little bit and you give him your lunch today, he's going to come back for your lunch tomorrow. As we speak, Senator Chris Van Hollen today traveled to El Salvador. We spoke with him on Monday, and he told us those were his plans. He did a press conference while he was there. He met with the vice president of El Salvador. I want to play for you all a little bit of what he had to say.
I asked the vice president if Abrego Garcia has not committed a crime, and the U.S. courts have found that he was illegally taken for the United States, and the government of El Salvador has no evidence that he was part of MS-13. Why is El Salvador continuing to hold him in CICOT? And his answer was that the Trump administration is paying El Salvador, the government of El Salvador, to keep him at CICOT.
Congressman, I thought that there was a one-time $6 million payment. Are these new payments? Is this the first you've heard that apparently there are continuous payments being made to the government of El Salvador from the Trump administration?
Well, there's no transparency. We don't know, but it shows, and I admire Senator Van Hollen's courage. But the Trump administration is in blatant violation of the Supreme Court. Look, they're saying that they're going to send a plane to get Abrego, but it's really Bukele who has the decision. That's simply not true. We realize now that they're paying El Salvador. Why don't they stop the payment? Why doesn't Trump direct Bukele or demand that Abrego be returned? They are playing games to avoid a court order. And, you know, Melissa is the expert, but my view is that the Supreme Court was too vague, that they need to be more direct and tell the president that he needs to demand the return of Abrego.
Congressman, I have a follow-up question for you. Can we switch gears and talk about J.D. Vance? Because you mentioned the vice president a little bit at the top, and I want to just put on the screen for folks what the vice president of the United States tweeted. He said, to say the administration must observe due process is to beg the question, what process is due, is function of our resources, the public interest, the status of the accused, the proposed punishment, and so many other factors. Here's the thing. What the heck? Is the vice president of the United States really asserting that if someone is a criminal and undocumented or undocumented in this country, they do not deserve due process?
You want to talk about word salads? That's a word salad. Let me tell you something. Vice President Harris would run circles around J.D. Vance's understanding of American law. It's an embarrassment that this man is vice president and graduated from Yale Law School and puts out stuff like that. I mean, what J.D. Vance is saying is that the Supreme Court and the Constitution's interpretation of due process doesn't matter, that the police can literally come to any person's home if they're not a U.S. citizen, take them, that the United States government can send them away to a dictatorship, and that they don't even need a trial. And who gets to decide if that's fair? J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. That is what J.D. Vance is arguing for in that tweet. His own attorney general isn't frivolous enough to make that kind of argument. They're at least keeping a pretense that we're going to send a plane. Vance is saying, no, you don't need to do it. He's basically saying the Supreme Court has ruled, now let them enforce it. I'm just going to go with my interpretation. It is dangerous, and it is a threat to the very constitutional system, not just for Abrego. If they can do it to Abrego, they can do it to any person who's vulnerable in this country.